Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly a wild intellectual detective story. We're heading back to the 13th century to get inside the head of a majorly influential Jewish mystic, Abraham Abulafia. Now, what makes his writing so gripping isn't just the dense theology, it's actually this huge, hidden psychological paradox. As we'll see, the very ideological enemy he fought against the hardest ended up secretly, and probably completely unconsciously, becoming his biggest theological influence. It's absolutely fascinating stuff.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the roadmap for today. We're going to trace this twisting theological maze, starting with the year of redemption, then decoding the divine letters, the Christian influence, the body of God, and finally, embracing the enemy.
Right, let's jump straight into part 1, the year of redemption and a prophecy for the end of exile.
So Abraham Abulafia wasn't just your average scholar sitting in a study. He actually believed he was a messiah, and he made a pretty audacious prediction. He flat out declared that the Jewish exile was going to end in one specific year, which, mapped to the Christian calendar, was 1290. Now, why 1290? Well, conveniently enough, this year lined up perfectly with his own 50th birthday. I mean, talk about a birthday present, right? In biblical tradition, the 50th year is the Jubilee, the ultimate year of redemption and liberation. But Abulafia didn't just pull this date out of thin air because it was his birthday. He was absolutely convinced he had mathematically extracted it right out of Scripture.
Which brings us to part 2, decoding the divine letters. Basically, the math of mysticism.
To really grasp how he predicted the future, we have to look at his methods. Abulafia treated the Torah like a giant, divine, cryptographic puzzle. His main tool for solving it? Gematria. If you're not familiar, gematria is a traditional system where every single Hebrew letter has a specific numerical value. Add up the letters in a word, and you get a number. He used these incredibly intense letter permutations to turn scriptural verses into outright mathematical equations. For him, if two words had the same math, they shared a deep, hidden cosmic connection. Let's actually break down how this works step by step. He goes to the book of Daniel, zeroing in on a verse about true writing. The Hebrew word for truth is emet. Now, Abulafia takes the three letters of emet, aleph, mem, and tav, and treats them as an acronym, a technique called rashi tevot. When you expand those letters into the specific words they represent in his system, aleph, matam, and tishim, you literally arrive at the numbers 1290. Boom! Just like that, he mathematically extracts the year 1290 straight from a biblical reference to truth.
But he takes the math way, way further. Everything links up. For instance, he takes the Hebrew word for ink, dio, and mathematically ties it to the period of exile. Now, for Abulafia, ink is a massive symbol. It represents pure intellect, righteous prophecy, and, well, his own writings. He then calculates the phrase land of Israel and finds it equals exactly 1290. He even runs the numbers on the virgin drop, this concept of a life-giving, demiurgic material, and gets 547, which perfectly matches the phrase inheritance of nations. Through this insane web of calculations, he wasn't just guessing a date. He was anchoring his 1290 prophecy to intellect, ink, and the land of Israel itself.
Moving right along to part 3, the Christian influence and dueling ideologies. And just a quick note as we get into this, we are objectively looking at the historical views of a 13th century guy living during some very intense religious conflicts. We're analyzing, not taking sides. Abulafia had a strictly binary way of looking at the world. To define his own identity, he built a massive, stark contrast against the rival faith of his time. He conceptually categorized things into the right side and the left side. On the right, he placed his own ideals, pure intellect, ink, Moses, and righteous, life-giving essence. On the left side, though, he placed everything he saw in the 13th century Christian theology around him. He linked that side to physical bodies, to blood, to Jesus, and to what he called the fetid drop. Basically, the Christian focus on physical incarnation and the crucifixion represented everything he thought a true mystic needed to completely transcend. But this wasn't just abstract philosophy. For him, it was a brutal internal psychological war. He believed a mystic had to actively fight to transform the left, that guilt, impure blood, and physical corporality, into the right, the pure intellect and ink. If you gave in to physical temptations, which he explicitly linked to Jesus and even sorcery, you were risking total inner idolatrous corruption. It was this constant, exhausting battle to wipe out the physical and elevate the mind.
And that brings us to the real core of our mystery in part 4, the body of God and the divine dimensions. This is where the paradox really hits.
So, as we just established, Abulafia absolutely despised the idea of a physical God in human form. He was all about an immaterial, pure divine intellect. In fact, he fiercely rejected the whole doctrine of bodily resurrection. He wrote super passionately that God would never ever confine a human's eternal soul to a, and I quote, lowly, woeful, foul, cursed, damned body. Tell us how you really feel, right? For him, the physical body was literally a curse.
But here is the massive contradiction hiding right inside his own architecture. Despite his intense hatred for anything physical, when Abulafia analyzes the Tetragrammaton, the sacred four-letter Hebrew name of God, YHVH, he maps the letters directly onto physical dimensions. He says the letter Yod is like a point or a body, the letter He is the plane or breadth, and the letter Vav is the line or length. He is literally assigning 3D physical geometry to the name of God. Completely unconsciously, he is mirroring the exact doctrine of divine incarnation in physical form that he aggressively attacked in his rivals.
Which sets us up perfectly to synthesize everything in Part 5, embracing the enemy, the paradox revealed.
We really have to step back and ask the big question. How on earth did Christian incarnation theology sneak so deeply into Abulafia's Jewish mysticism, especially when he spent his whole life fighting it? Well, there's this weird psychological reality where obsessing over an enemy can actually cause you to absorb their traits. And the absolute smoking gun for this is found in a genuinely shocking passage he wrote about Passover.
Listen to this description of a Passover ritual from his later writings. He notes that when someone points to the divine name or points to the unleavened bread, it's as if they're saying, "This is my God." Think about that for a second. He's talking about physically pointing at a piece of material bread and identifying it directly as the divine essence. If you know anything about Christian liturgy, the parallel is impossible to miss. It's practically a mirror image of the Last Supper Eucharist, where Jesus points at the unleavened bread and says, "This is my body." Abulafia, the ultimate champion of the purely immaterial mind, inadvertently recreated the Eucharist right inside his own mystical framework.
And it goes even deeper. He actually integrated his enemy into the very name of God. In his deep meditative writings, he literally chops the four-letter divine name YVH right down the middle. The first half, YH, he claims for his own ideals, intellect, ink, immateriality, and righteousness. But the second half, the VH, he explicitly hands that over to corporality, to blood, and to Jesus. In his desperate attempt to box in and defeat the theology of his rivals, he wound up placing his concept of Jesus and physical incarnation directly inside the literal structure of the Hebrew God.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to end this explainer on. Abulafia poured endless energy into vanquishing his ideological enemies, calling their beliefs corrupt and base. But his absolute hyperfixation on their focus on the physical body and blood caused those exact concepts to bleed directly into his own divine geometry. He forever merged his greatest enemy into his own concept of God. It poses a fascinating psychological question for all of us. If fighting the other with that much intensity eventually turns them into a core part of yourself, who was Abulafia really fighting all along? Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the structures of the ideas you learn.